let's talk about where we're at with Andy Burnham. We know that he has been blocked from running in this by-election. How are MPs reacting? I mean, is there going to be more backlash that could potentially change what's been decided, or is this it?
I mean, whisper it. I mean, we're recording around lunchtime and Parliament doesn't actually start on a Monday until after lunchtime. So the MPs are still on their trains, driving. They're not all together yet. So maybe more could happen. But basically, whisper it. The backlash has been quite muted.
Right.
And so, I mean, we can come on to all of the wider ramifications and stuff. There'll be lots of people listening who think that this was a real strategic error for Keir Starmer. But actually, you know, the immediate question was, could he survive the immediate blowback? And so far, there hasn't been much of one. Doesn't mean there's been none. Annalise Midgley, for example, the MP for Knowsley, is not, quote unquote, one of the usual suspects, in that she used to work for Keir Starmer, and the leader of the opposition's office. She also worked in Lotto for Jeremy Corbyn, but she's a sort of heavyweight trade union organiser and is not one of these people who just sort of tweets to criticise the Prime Minister willy-nilly. She will have really thought about that quite carefully. She put out a statement last night. There's been the odd other MP like that, but it is mostly the left of the party. And I think what would have made this really difficult for Keir Starmer would have been if we'd had Sadiq Khan, Lucy Powell, Angela Rayner, the people who said they thought Andy Burnham should be able to stand, coming out to criticise the decision to block him. So far they haven't. It doesn't mean people aren't, you know, unhappy about this, because lots of people are, but actually in terms of this being an immediate crisis for Keir Starmer, it isn't. It's more a continuation of what we've been saying for months, that his leadership is still in trouble and people are still unhappy with his premiership.
But there are backbenchers who are organising a letter to write to him in contention against his decision.
Well, what we've heard so far is that there are 2 letters going around, which again doesn't bode well, I would say. They maybe should just get one letter.
So Labour.
With slightly different wording. I mean, we might see that this is why I've caveated it, because obviously we might see 100 Labour MPs or something coming out to condemn this decision. Crucially, that 100 number would be bigger than the 80 needed to trigger a leadership challenge. So if you get a serious rump of support for a criticism of this decision, that is significant. But actually,
I mean, it's essentially a sort of by proxy vote of no confidence in Keir Starmer's leadership.
But then it's worth remembering we've already had that. We had that over welfare, where it was over 100. So already we've had these signals that there are more than enough Labour MPs who are so unhappy that they're willing to get together and put their name publicly to something. They haven't yet coalesced around a named challenger to trigger a leadership contest. But, you know, we could still see that, but definitely in terms of whether this was going to be explosive, so far it isn't.
Well, let's talk about who benefits from this decision in a bit, but I wanted to find out what you thought in terms of the wisdom of the decision, because the NEC officers who made this decision, their argument was we can't afford a by-election for the Greater Manchester mayoralty. What do you think of that rationale, and how wise was it to block Burnham from this by-election, do you think?
Yeah, well, so on our podcast on Friday, I want to correct myself slightly, or not correct myself, but add something to it, because we were talking about how NEC members were telling us that a by-election or a mayoral by-election would be too expensive. And we were talking about it in terms of the cost to the party. But actually the argument subsequently that people were making was not that it would be expensive for the Labour Party, which it would be, and they don't have much money. But more that basically the Greater Manchester mayoralty would have to pay to hold the election itself, and it would cost millions. And so the Labour NEC argument, or the argument made by the Prime Minister himself to colleagues, make of it what you will, but his argument was more, we can't justify spending taxpayers' money on a completely unnecessary mayoral by-election, you know, when that's about 4 million quid that could be spent on public services. So that is the argument, but everyone knows that that's not really what it's principally about. I mean, there was no good option for Keir Starmer here. And I think that some of the analysis is getting a bit muddied, maybe, between, you know, people who just don't like Keir Starmer saying that this was a bad strategic move when maybe it was the better thing to do. I think it was kind of inevitable that they would block him, and it was just this question of whether he could survive it politically. I think basically nothing has changed, which doesn't mean it's not, it doesn't mean things are fine for Keir Starmer, but we are where we were last week or a few weeks ago and before Christmas, which is Keir Starmer's leadership is in real trouble, and this is just another manifestation of that. The key things that have changed are just that we have this reminder of the thing that basically loads of people in the Labour movement hate most about Keir Starmer, which is they just hate the people around him, and they have this perception that people like Morgan McSweeney do politics in a kind of nasty way, wielding power without principles. It's factional, it's brutish, it's blokey, and this has been, they haven't had many reminders of that in the past few months. They've been really careful. The way they managed the budget was all about appeasing Labour backbenchers. Yeah. And this is a really, really unsavoury reminder of that. That's, I think, the first thing that's kind of changed a little bit. But the second one is just that now we know that Andy Burnham can't stand in a leadership contest.
Yeah, and that's really significant, isn't it? Because it leaves the soft left of the party without an obvious figurehead to coalesce around as a potential challenger to Keir Starmer, because not only do we have the May elections coming up, which are supposed to be this big moment of vulnerability for his leadership, but we also have the Gorton and Denton by-election as well, which is expected in February, I think, and the outcome of that will be laid at his door because he was the one who blocked a very popular candidate with the public from standing. So the chances of a leadership election are still there, but the soft left, who were they thinking about now that Burnham seems to be out of the picture? There's not really another route for him unless he runs as an independent, which was something that was being whispered about.
Well, it's so interesting because the soft left have played a very good game over the past few months. If people have been reading our coverage in the New Statesman, every time, or thank you, but in terms of, Wes Streeting has come out quite strong. Andy Burnham has been quite vocal, but he's not been in Parliament. And every time it has looked like Wes Streeting was at risk of securing a coronation or everyone rowing in behind him, there have been briefings to us and to other places that the soft left would unite to stop him. Very punchy briefings that Angela Rayner, that she would rather stick pins in her eyes than support Wes Streeting. The real quote is much ruder. But I can't.
You can save that for New Statesman podcast after dark.
People around her have been pretty clear privately that she would stand to stop him. Right. But is that true? Realistically, she needs to settle her tax affairs, and there have always been questions about whether she would want the intrusion into her private life, and certainly people around Wes Streeting, but also other people on the soft left, think that that's just her sort of positioning herself best. Why show her hand at this point?
Okay.
It's in her interest to sort of beef up, her position to maximise her own power, but actually she might not go for it. So they've played a good game around Angela Rayner, but also just more broadly over the past few months, the soft left have been really insistent that they do talk all the time, that they're really coordinated, basically to kill off this idea that they don't have a candidate. But I just think they don't have a candidate. I think there are still all those questions about Angela Rayner, and then we've written before about Ed Miliband.
Yes, because Ed Miliband was one of the key Labour figures who came out and said that the NEC shouldn't block Burnham's candidacy. Lucy Powell did as well, and she was the one person who actually voted to have him on the ballot paper. Angela Rayner as well, they were all in favour of letting him stand. But then you also had figures from the Labour right, like Wes Streeting deploring the briefings against Burnham, and Shabana Mahmood praising Burnham as this exceptional politician. I don't think they went as far as to say that he shouldn't have been blocked, but they were also sort of positioning themselves in quite a clever way on this issue.
Yeah, everyone is positioning themselves in quite a clever way around this in anticipation of some sort of leadership contest. I mean, on the soft left, to finish off that thought, I think that some people on the soft left are thinking that it will still be Wes Streeting. and they are conscious that he will need some prominent soft left backers to help him do it.
Yeah.
So I think if you're Lisa Nandy, if you're Louise Haigh, maybe still if you're Angela Rayner, despite all those briefings, maybe you want to be courted by Wes Streeting and be given the best job possible.
Be his chancellor or be his deputy or something like that.
I think that there is still some thinking around that, but I really don't think that the soft left is quite as united as everyone insists. I mean, I think I mentioned in passing the last time we were speaking that some people on the soft left had gone off the idea of Angela Rayner being, so not just whether she wants it, but actually the people around her who you would think of as her allies are also unsure. And then, there's Ed Miliband. We've written before about how he wants to sort of inform the ideas behind a successful soft left person. He's pretty close to Andy Burnham behind the scenes, but it's always, he's always been talked of as a possible chancellor, and he's ruled himself out of standing. Someone did say to me that if there was no one else, they think he probably still would stand. But that has all the obvious baggage of, having stood before. So I do think actually, and I think that, I basically think that the soft left is in quite a tricky position as we go into this week, even though a leadership contest might not be for months. I think May is still the obvious pain point. And I think it's kind of demonstrated by the fact that there are lots of chatty people on the soft left who are normally really, really good at picking up the phone, who aren't really this morning. And that could just be a coincidence. But I think that Andy Burnham was maybe their best hope. And everyone is adjusting to the new reality that he clearly won't be on the ballot anytime soon.
Last week, when we were talking about what may or may not happen in Gorton, we were discussing some figures from our senior data journalist Ben Walker, who has this Britain Predicts model, and he calculated that without Burnham, Labour could lose this by-election to Reform. If that happens, would there be just... I know that you said that May is still supposed to be the crunch point for a potential leadership election, but could that be hastened by a loss of Gorton and Denton? This is in Manchester, this is in Labour land.
I think that undoubtedly Gorton and Denton becomes a new flashpoint, a sort of point of risk for Keir Starmer, because, as you say, the polling would suggest Labour will not win there. We don't know who the candidate will be. Yeah. The only name really doing the rounds on the Labour side is Bev Craig, who's the leader of Manchester City Council. I don't know if it will be her, but she's sort of the only person being suggested that I've heard so far. Right. But she wouldn't have the sort of the personal vote that a big name like Andy Burnham would have. Yeah. And so... And basically, Labour or Keir Starmer has sent this massive message that they don't even think that they could win the Manchester mayoralty against Reform, let alone a by-election. So I think it's looking quite difficult. And I think there is this assumption that Andy Burnham would have won it because of his massive personal appeal. So I think if they lose, then people will point the finger directly at Keir Starmer, because, as you say, all these other senior figures who I'm sure did not want Andy Burnham to make a return to Parliament, people like Wes Streeting or Shabana Mahmood, they've been very careful to wash their hands of the decision. Keir Starmer has really owned it personally. I gather that NEC meeting was quite extraordinary, where it really was the Prime Minister in person himself looking people in the eye and outlining the case, as I've made to you, that using taxpayers' money on an unnecessary mayoral by-election wouldn't be the responsible thing to do. So he will bear direct responsibility for it. The question is, would you want to change leader about 8 weeks before the May local elections, or would you be happy to be in the middle of a leadership contest while contesting those other key elections? So that could be a flashpoint, or it could just be that it builds up this momentum even further into May.
Yes, I suppose you don't really want to be the person coming in before the May elections who then has to explain the results of the May elections when you've been leader for 5 minutes as well.
But I think that whole thing of holding the by-election in late February, early March is in and of itself quite interesting. I mean, everyone I've spoken to seems to think it's smart, and you rip the plaster off, get it done early, and you separate it from the other May elections. But I do just wonder if they've given themselves an earlier pinch point.
Yeah, because I suppose there's two arguments, aren't there? You could have saved it for this big election day, when all the other elections are taking place, which is often what happens with by-elections. They get held when local elections are held. But I suppose the calculation is, let's not give our opponents enough time to organise for this and get it over with and not have it as this running sore. But the May elections are a running sore, I suppose. Going back to Ben Walker's polling on who could potentially be the successor to the Labour leadership, Ed Miliband is most popular among Labour members. But when you look at the polling that pits each individual potential candidate against Keir Starmer, then the one who comes out on top is Angela Rayner. I don't know what that tells us about where MPs are at. The reporting suggests that Wes Streeting is the most popular contender among Labour MPs. But that counts for something, doesn't it, that Labour members have that calculation in their minds that Angela Rayner would be most top in their minds to beat Keir Starmer.
Yeah, 'cause she's quite still beloved by the Labour base.
Yeah.
And I think she knows it, which is why there's this just kind of delicious question that honestly everyone you speak to in the Labour Party asks, even the people really close to her, whether she would actually want it. Because when you're that popular with the Labour membership, obviously a campaign could change things, and it's a poll, and we don't, and there are always these questions with these kind of selectorate pollings of whether only a certain type of person is likely to
respond. Yeah, of course. And it's so hard to poll party members, famously.
And harder to identify them. And so with that caveat, I think that, that's why it is interesting, because she knows that being Prime Minister is potentially within touching distance, and yet the people around her don't know if she'd want it. And the polling around Ed Miliband, we've said this before, it's interesting because he's so popular, but it is in a sort of stay in your lane way, where Labour members love him the most during his energy brief, and
they love him for who he is.
They love him for who he is, but they don't necessarily want that to translate into him being their leader. That he's the most popular cabinet minister on his own terms, but not necessarily for the leadership.
Yeah, and what's interesting is Wes Streeting doesn't rank particularly highly in this kind of polling, which suggests to me that although he's got reportedly a backing of quite a few Labour MPs, he would need someone from the soft left, wouldn't he, to do the work in trying to beef his support up among the Labour membership. And I suppose that's the next thing that we'll be looking out for, those alliances between Wes Streeting and the soft left.
Totally, and definitely that was being discussed and suggested to me,
right,
even before this Andy Burnham stuff happened. I think that maybe some senior soft left people could be open to being courted by Wes Streeting. I mean, we would also have said Shabana Mahmood and Andy Burnham was, I think
we mentioned that.
That Andy Burnham certainly really rates Shabana Mahmood, but it's sort of irrelevant now if he can't stand. But definitely I think that all these different people thinking about the top job know that they couldn't just represent one part of the party. They will want other senior figures to back them. And I think that the two people who've been keeping their cards really close to their chest have been Shabana Mahmood and Angela Rayner. Like, they're the ones who more than anyone get spoken about by colleagues who say that they can't read them or they don't know what they're thinking. Obviously Angela Rayner did just come out and support Andy Burnham, but I think it's still interesting to wonder what she is up to, if she and her allies are secretly happy that Andy Burnham doesn't have the chance to stand, or whether just this makes the pressure more intense on her, that she'll have to consider it when she maybe doesn't really want to. I also just think as a final comment, going back to what we were talking about earlier about whether this was the right strategic move from Keir Starmer. Obviously there's been so much chat about that, and we both probably have way more that we could say on it. I think it's interesting that when this happened, I happened to be talking to a former advisor to David Cameron, who was around when Cameron had to work out whether to let Boris Johnson come back.
Yes, yeah.
And, they spent a lot of time thinking about how to manage that while trying to be kind of calm and cool publicly.
Well, Boris Johnson played the same role that Andy Burnham does, doesn't he? He used to turn up to Tory conference and there would be queues out the door for his events, and he would say things that were slightly off message, and he was always positioned as the potential contender.
Yeah, totally. There's such obvious parallels.
Yeah.
And so it was actually unexpectedly the perfect person to be speaking to as the Andy Burnham news broke. And they just said it was obvious that what Keir needed to do was to reach some sort of deal with Burnham where they would say, yeah, you can stand, but give me a year. Because actually, you can see the logic of, there's so many things to say about this. Obviously, Andy Burnham has displayed quite a lot of urgency about wanting to get back into Parliament, but that's because he wants to be there if there is a leadership contest. Once he's actually back, this obviously won't happen now, but once he's actually back, who's saying whether he would actually move quickly? You want to do a Mark Carney in Canada, maybe you go late, because I think there's a really genuine question as to whether any British Prime Minister can be popular right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
the sheen could fall right off the moment that you're in that position.
So maybe you actually want to run it late if you actually want to win the next election, or maybe you want a serious chance at governing. But I think there is a question as to whether if Andy Burnham had come back, whether he would have wanted to move immediately. So this person's argument was they should broker some sort of deal, bring him back in, but give Keir Starmer a bit of time. That was their instinct. And then basically, that's what happened, or that is what they tried to do. There were these conversations, I gather, between Keir Starmer / Number 10 / senior
With this
Labour
person
people.
selling their consultancy services to Number 10.
They should have. There were conversations between Team Starmer and Team Burnham saying, look, you can't... if you don't put your hat in the ring for this one, you can stand in 2027 and, come back in Parliament in time for the next general election. And I gather that those conversations just broke down.
Right.
But I wonder if that would have been the best outcome for everyone, or certainly for Keir Starmer. Maybe blocking is a better option than having Andy Burnham coming in planning to challenge you immediately, if that's what would have happened. But maybe a sort of a more deft approach would have been to manage to bring him in, but buy yourself a little bit of time. That isn't what has happened, and maybe that's also partly because Andy Burnham has been so explicit about his intentions.